Not at all. Well, here to talk more about how the cost of living will affect working people, as well as the latest from Downing Street, is Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Christine. I mean, this is really now a squeeze, a major squeeze on ordinary people. I mean, what do you make of it all?
Oh, I think it's disastrous. Most families are now going to have to wait 6 months for any help. There's nothing to help them in April. It comes in October, and even then, it's only half of the amount, and it's spreading the pain. £200 over 5 years. I mean, it's just ridiculous. What Rishi Sunak is doing is gambling with the taxpayers' money, gambling with our money that the price of energy will come down, that gas prices will come down, and it'll all be fine. Well, we don't know that. We had put forward a package of measures which would have taken about £1,000 a year off the cost of living for families, would have made them more able to cope with this, and a tax on those giant companies that have made super profits in this, a one-off to try and alleviate the burden on ordinary families who are now going to have to make the decision: do they pay for their heating or do they pay for food? And that is scary, and he's gambling, and it's not good enough.
And Christine, do you support the rise in national insurance that Boris Johnson and this government are proposing and will be implementing?
No. Not at all. What you're seeing at the moment is families facing a triple whammy of a national insurance rise, energy price rise, and now mortgage rise as well. And, even the sort of meagre, begrudging support announced by Rishi Sunak, there's still going to be more than £1,000 a year poorer. And, we did have a rescue package which we put forward, and one of the things was that we would scrap the national insurance hike and the stealth tax through freezing the threshold on tax payments. And I think what we have to recognise in this is that Rishi Sunak talks a lot about being fiscally wise and looking after the money, but it's all about the spreadsheets. Where in those spreadsheets are people and the impact it's having on people's lives? We need to have some empathy from the Chancellor, and we need to have some understanding of the impact this is having on ordinary people's lives. And he needs to start looking to big business who've made a profit in the pandemic and who are making a profit now to help us out of this. If we're really all in this together, then they need to be doing their bit. They need to be paying more tax. They need to be helping get ordinary families through this.
A little bit worried here that all of the parties in the House of Commons seem to be looking at this from a demand-side perspective. Your package of £1,000 per household, it's Labour's package of handing out money as well, and taxing and handing out money. All of the parties seem to be doing this. Is not the worry here that if we only focus on the demand side and hand out money to people, that could actually push prices further up? That in and of itself could be inflationary. Whereas if we looked on the supply side, about producing more of our own domestic energy, about driving down those costs, not through pumping up the money supply even more, would that not be a better solution here?
We do need to do that, and what we need to be doing is making sure that we're investing, and this government hasn't done that either. We are in this mess because this government has dithered and delayed about everything, that we don't have as much of a shift to a more sustainable economy than we should have. They used up Rishi Sunak stands up and says, there's been a big demand for gas last year. Well, this government ran down our storage of gas. So, they can't have it both ways. And what we think about
here, on the specifics of that supply side, would the Liberal Democrat Party support expanding shale gas exploration in the UK instead of importing it from overseas, producing our own gas here?
No. What we need to
do. Okay, so you wouldn't hang on, Christine. If you wouldn't support expanding gas power, would you support building more nuclear power stations, very clean energy, building more nuclear power stations across the UK? Yes or no?
No, we've been absolutely clear.
Sorry, Christine Jardine. I'm really sorry. This is the final part of this question.
If you don't let me speak.
This is the final part of my question. This is the final part. I promise you can have a long answer after this. If you're not going to produce more gas domestically and you're opposed to new nuclear domestically, how on earth are we going to get this energy to drive down bills?
I did not say either of those things, Tom. Please don't put words in my mouth. What we are doing is prioritising in a crisis. And what we see is that there have been massive profits made by giant companies in all sectors in this pandemic and this crisis. And what we need is a one-off to help get us through this. Now, long term, we want to shift away from being dependent on imported gas. We need to do that. We need energy security in this country. Yes, we need to do that long term. But the way to do it is not shale. It's not coal. The way to do it, and the way to do it is to move forward and transition into clean economies. If the Conservative government hadn't cut the investments in carbon capture and they hadn't moved away from important projects like the ones in Peterhead, then we would be much further forward. But what we have right now is a priority that has to be getting people through this winter and using the resources we have to do that to the best of our ability. And that's where this government is getting it wrong.
You mentioned moving towards a more sustainable future energy-wise. Is there any country that you would think right now is doing it correctly? Because this is obviously a wider European problem, this energy crisis too. So is there any country that you could point to that you would say is doing a good job at this?
Well, France has imposed a windfall tax. There's an example that we could look at. Other countries, we don't need to look very far to see that there is another way of doing it, that there is a way of looking at the crisis and looking at how we get through it. But you know what? This government is now waited until we're engulfed by the crisis rather than doing what we asked them to do, which was to have a summit, to sit down with all the stakeholders, with different parties and come up with a strategy. They don't seem to have a strategy for anything, this government. They seem to go from one quick sort of short-term solution, one patch, one sticking plaster to the next. And what we need in this is a real long-term strategy. First of all, to get us through this, to prioritise getting through this winter, bringing down inflation, dealing with the interest rates, but moving forward into a more sustainable economy. They have to get their finger out and do this. And they're so obsessed with the problems they have in Downing Street, and goodness knows how that's running at the moment. I mean, from my experience of working in there, if you lose all these top people at one time, you've got a big problem. They are so obsessed with this, and they're mismanaging everything from the internal workings of Downing Street to the economy. And it really is time that instead of all these resignations at Downing Street that Boris Johnson admitted that actually he's making a hash of it, it's time he left.
Well, Christine Jardine, we really appreciate your perspective here on To The Point this morning. Thank you for taking us through what the Lib Dems would do and your criticism of the Conservative Party as well. Thank you for your perspective this morning.